Hey guys, I'm gonna put this video on our how to do stuff in Japan playlist because it definitely is a heads up video. You gotta be careful with this one for reasons that will become obvious shortly. Usually these videos, or all our videos, are triggered by something we see or something we hear or a request from a patron or something like that. This one is no exception. Two things happened this week to trigger this. One was there was the usual yearly report on television talking about how the pollen season is about to begin. And so they do this every year, right? So of course spring is coming, so you get pollen from all the flowers, but also now the unskilled botanist doesn't know much about trees or things, right? But there are some trees in the mountains of Japan that are prolific. They could be cedar trees, they could be something different, but they're prolific in producing pollen, apparently. Big clouds of pollen. And so every year, as well as all the usual pollen that we get from all the flowers, there's also pollen that come from these cedar trees that apparently aggravate people's allergies or hay fever. So you're always hearing, pretty well all year round, you hear about kafunsho and arugi, pretty well all year round, but in spring in particular, you're hearing about it all the time, arugi and kafunsho, so hay fever and allergies. So usually before COVID, as you guys know, lots of Japanese people wore masks all year round, and they wore them in winter because they had colds, or they didn't want to catch colds, or they knew someone who had a cold, or they heard about colds or something. And in spring, lots of people wear masks because of the hay fever and the pollen and the dust, right? And we'll get to the dust in a minute. But and statistically too, the incidence of, or the number of people, the percentage of people who have hay fever in Japan is super high. It's something, it could be 40% or something like that. It's really high. It's one of the highest levels of hay fever in the world, highest percentage of people with hay fever in the world. It's really, really high. Incidentally, we saw a report years ago. Tokyo University did a study on this topic, and they came to the conclusion that Japanese people, because they're brought up from when they're babies, they're brought up in really super clean, sterile environments, because as we've talked about lots of times before, you know, most Japanese people are fairly paranoid about germs and cleanliness. And so the babies are brought up, or children are brought up from when they're babies in super sterile environments, and really discouraged from getting dirty or getting germs on them, right? And Tokyo University's conclusion was that because of that, Japanese people don't build a very strong immune system, and that makes them more vulnerable to hay fever and allergies and things like that. So that was Tokyo University's conclusion. Incidentally, we heard about that at the time. It was a small article, can't remember where it was, but just a small story about that, and we never heard it mentioned again. And that's fairly typical. I remember thinking, might have even mentioned it in a video at the time, that we'd never hear about it again. And it's because it was sort of challenging the status quo, right? Japanese people think it's important to keep everything clean and, you know, make sure you don't get any germs on you to stop you getting sick. Tokyo University's conclusion was that actually makes people get sick more often because their immune systems are weaker. And we predicted at the time that we'd never hear about it again, and we haven't. You know, they never went, hey, well, maybe we should rethink this whole super cleanliness paranoia thing. Obviously they didn't do that. That would challenge the status quo. It would challenge the way things are, and it would sort of suggest change was a good idea. So obviously we never heard about that again. So that's just a side note. So the general belief is here that pollen, and then following on from that, dust. And this is sort of this is the other thing that triggered the video, was Japanese people, most, not all, but most Japanese people are super paranoid about dust, right? And I made the mistake this week of taking the dust filter off one of the air conditioners, and I walked across the room, and the dust filter was pretty full. It should have been empty. It should have been cleaned earlier. And as I walked across the room, it just made a little cloud of dust because some of the dust on the filter came off and made a little cloud as I walked across the room, right? The act of walking across the room upset some of the dust and it came off the air filter and made a little cloud in the air. And the family lost their minds, right? Oh, dust, oh no, dust, oh no, it's dust, right? They're paranoid about it. They're absolutely paranoid about it. I remember once taking a dust filter from, might have been from one of the kerosene stoves, and rinsing it in the sink, in the kitchen sink, and the wife lost her mind. Oh, dust, dirty, kid, and going on about how dirty it was to wash the dust filter from the stove in the kitchen sink, right? And you know, you can sort of, talking earlier about the heads up thing, there's no point in arguing this with anyone, right? With a Japanese person, because they've been told all their lives that dust is an evil thing, right? Some of you might remember we talked about on a video years ago about the fear of rain. Japanese people are really fearful. Oh, don't get wet. You know, it's all umbrellas and raincoats, and you know, kids don't go playing in the rain or anything like that. You know, get out of the rain, and you know, lots of stories about this. People, oh, here's the cops. The cops sit down here every weekend and catch people going through the stop sign up there every weekend. We've showed you this lots of times on this very road. But yeah, they're paranoid about the rain, right? Don't go in the rain. You'll catch a cold. Don't go in the rain. And there's a couple of reasons. One is they're paranoid that if you get wet, now even in summer when it's 38 degrees, you know, oh, don't get wet, and you'll get adult men get out of a car and go 20 meters into a shop and they'll have to use an umbrella because they don't want to get rain on them. You know, they're paranoid about getting rain on them. And one of the reasons is that they, you know, get wet. If you get wet, you might catch a cold. Don't catch a cold, right? 38 degrees. Don't catch a cold. The other one is that they're super paranoid about the dust that's in the rain. And because it's been talked about on the news here before, on television before. See the yellow flowers there? That's the pollen in that too. But it's been talked about, it gets talked about fairly regularly on TV too, that, you know, they analyse the water and what's in the water, in the raindrops. And because as the rain falls, it collects dust, right? And so the rain's got dust in it. And because some of us come from countries where, you know, there's a fair percentage, for example, in Australia, there's a fair percentage of people who live in the country, in the countryside, whose only source of water is rainwater. And they've got rainwater tanks on their houses, and the rain falls on their roof, and the water and the dust all go down into the roof gutter and then down into the water tank, and that's their water. That's their drinking water and their bath water. And you know, lots of Australian people have either lived in houses like that or have spent time in houses like that, and it's just normal. In fact, tank water usually tastes pretty good, providing no animals have died in it. You've got to be careful about that. But you know, when you come from a culture where people consider rain one of the clearest, one of the cleanest types of water you can get, and then you come live in Japan where they're absolutely paranoid. And I know that, as with a lot of these things, they are based on reality, right? It is true, when rain falls, it collects dust, and so, you know, if you analyse the rainwater, you'll find little bits of dust in there. And it's also true that dust can contain things like dust mites and things like that, obviously. And allergies and hay fever are horrible things to have, aren't they? I mean, obviously, it's just bad luck, isn't it? You know, you can get a family of people where nobody has hay fever except one person, you know. Why is it that one person gets hay fever? It's just, there's an element of bad luck to that, isn't there? You know, and allergies the same. You know, why is it that the brother doesn't have an allergy but the sister does, or vice versa? And, you know, there's no doubt that all that, I always feel sorry for people that have those things. Same as asthma. You know, it's just a bad luck thing, isn't it? Why does that person have asthma and that one doesn't? You know, so there's an element of luck, the bad luck to having those things, isn't there? You know, and no doubt, if you are susceptible to allergies or hay fever, you know, the dust and the pollen is going to be a horrible thing, no doubt about it. And we know we've got family members and friends who suffer. You know, we know one old guy, and he gets hay fever, and he seems to get it all year round. You know, there's always something, because you got the smoke in the air, and you got the dust in the air, and you got the pollen in the air, and all year round the air gets too dry and he gets hay fever, and you know, it's a horrible thing to have, no doubt about it. But but you also have this case, it's taken to an extreme, and that's what happens a lot in Japan. You know, you get these things that are sort of based on reality, but then they're taken to an extreme that becomes irrational, you know, and so you've got just normal people. Like, there's no one in our family has hay fever or allergies. They've been in our immediate family. One of our kids, a doctor told us once that one of our kids had an allergy, right? And didn't do any tests at all. Just heard the story. Oh, sometimes she coughs in the morning. Allergy. And no doubt, allergy is overdiagnosed in Japan because he did no tests at all. He just came to the conclusion, oh, she must have allergy, right? And obviously since then, that coughing in the morning stopped, so it was probably a cold. So they overdiagnosed allergy. So the doctors too are paranoid about allergy and kafuncho, hay fever, and just the paranoia about it. So nobody in our family has a dust allergy or hay fever, and yet still that paranoia about the dust. You know, about it's being dirty. That's the image. That's the image that they have. The dust is really dirty, and you know, I've pointed out to our kids. Sometimes, you know, when you're sitting near a window and the sun's coming through the window and it catches the dust in the light catches the dust and you can see it, you know, and I've pointed out to my kids before, look, see the dust? That's what we're breathing, you know. The reason that there's dust in the dust filter of the aircon is because the air's full of dust and we're breathing it all the time, but we just can't see it, you know. And so being paranoid about breathing dust is ridiculous because we breathe dust all the time, don't we? So, but, you know, I can sort of talk to my kids about it a little bit to try and give them some balance in their thinking, you know, to give them another perspective on it. But I'd suggest to you, if you're going to be in Japan, you sort of got to go along with this stuff, you know. You sort of, because everybody believes it, and if you're with a group of people and suddenly there's a bit of dust comes up, you know, and they're all dust, and they all go on about it, you know, you can't. It's pointless trying to go, what? Dust? What's your problem? You know, what's your problem? You know, you just can't do it. You sort of got to go along with it. You're better off just saying nothing at all. You know, a lot of this stuff that, you know, these videos are talking about these things that are sort of taken to an extreme that some of us think, well, that's just too much. That's pretty weird. You just can't react to it because they all think it's normal. You know, if you're brought up in a culture where from when you're young, everybody you know, your family, your friends, your teachers, everybody you've ever known in your life reacts to dust like that. Like bees, we talked about bees once before. You know, you're sitting at a barbecue and a bee flies past. You know, they lose their minds. Oh, abunai, and you get these grown men, you know, hiding under the table because there's a bee. You know, and you can't laugh at them, and you can't, although sometimes you might want to, you know, you can't. So it's the same as with the dust thing when they're going on about abunai, you know, it's dangerous, dust, dangerous. You can't argue, you know. And if you do have Japanese family, you know, you might have a relationship where you can talk about it a little bit, but you got to tread lightly because, you know, for them it's normal. You know, and even if you have a family member who's fairly logical and you can sort of say, well, look, you know, you can see the dust. Look at the sun coming through the window. You can see the dust, you know. It's not hurting you. But even though sort of on a logical level, they sort of might get what you're saying. You know, there's still this deep-rooted thing that dust is a dirty, bad thing that'll make you sick and that you know, got to avoid it at all costs. And you know, that's a lot of these things is why while we're driving around, you'll see people driving around in cars, just one person in a car wearing a mask. You know, and we've seen that. It's not about COVID usually. It's, you know, before COVID. If you search mask, if you go to our channel page and search mask on the video page, you know, there'll be lots of videos that'll come up about masks, and they'll be way before 2019. Because it's always been a thing in Japan, you know. See the two people in front of us here, probably family members, right? They live together in a house, might sleep next to each other in a bed, but they still have to put their masks on when they go in the car. There's one, see the other car with one person in the car with a mask on, so it's just what they do, you know, dust. So you've got to be sensitive to it, you know, you've got to be sensitive to it if you're somewhere and there's dust, a bit of wind blows and some dust blows through and everybody loses their minds. You've just got to be cool about it and not sort of react to it. It is hard sometimes, even though you know these things on a logical level, you know, and there's been videos I've made before talking about topics where I've said you've got to watch out for this and you've got to make sure you don't react to that and you've got to do this and you've got to do that, or you know, it's best to do this and it's best to do that is usually the way I term it, isn't it? Having said that, you know, I've made videos like that and then a week later I made the same mistake myself. It's really hard not to, for the same reason that it's hard for a Japanese person to not react to a bee flying past or to dust blowing past or something, because that's what is normal to them. You see it on TV. You'll see some TV presenters in a park doing something in a park and suddenly a bee flies past and they all go, oh, abunai, abunai, and grown men running from a bee, you know. And it's hard for them not to, because they just believe, and so it's the same for us, isn't it? You know, we've come from cultures, some of us, I mean, you know, dust storms in Australia, the centre of Australia is a desert, and if the temperatures and the wind and everything's just right or just wrong, you can get a wall of dust, a cloud of dust 5,000 feet high, you know, come across from the desert and just cover cities, you know, cover a city with orange dust, and the sky will go orange with the dust, and you know, that sort of stuff happens in Australia fairly regularly. You travel in the countryside in Australia, everything's dusty, the inside of your car, everything. So for us, dust, you know. Side note too, one of the people that we know lived in South Africa for about 6 months. And they're interesting people to talk to because they have a different perspective, you know. South Africa's pretty dusty in some places, you know. And actually when it came up this week, and I was sort of talking to the lady a little bit about it, gently, and she was pretty cool. You can see, you got to be really careful because people will agree with you here just to be agreeable, you know. But it was interesting, you could see that she had a different perspective on it from living in South Africa. That obviously had 6 months of living amongst the dust and hadn't had any bad side effects from it, so you could see she had a different perspective on things. But, you know, you sort of just got to go along with it. Just accept it. You know, just accept it if everybody's going on about the dust or the rain. See, it explains the rain thing a bit more too. The rain thing's not just about catching a cold. That's often what they'll say. Oh, don't go in the rain, you'll catch a cold. You know, but it's also the fact they don't think the rain's clean. Oh, rainwater, you know, don't drink that. We actually have a rainwater tank on the old farmhouse. Some of you would have seen that. And we collect rainwater and give it to the plants and things. And it's, you know, it's nice clean rainwater, but yeah, no, you couldn't use it for anything else. That wouldn't be cool at all. So yeah, that's it. If you come to Japan and people are reacting in a big way about rain or about dust or about bees, they're full on about the bees. That's a funny one. We actually might have talked about that on another video, but because some Japanese bees are aggressive. Now look, never experienced an aggressive bee in Japan. Come across lots of bees and hornets and wasps and all sorts of stuff. Never. I've been stung by a couple because I grabbed them, you know, cutting up bamboo or something and accidentally grabbed one. And understandably, the bee was upset and stung me, you know. But never once been chased by a bee. I mean, they're paranoid about that, about aggressive bees that will chase you and sting you. And never once experienced that anywhere in Japan, you know, in the countryside or anywhere. And experienced lots of bees and wasps, made videos on the Nature in Japan playlist, lots of videos on there about wasps and bees. They'll just fly right past, you know. As I've explained to my kids before, they're not looking for people, they're looking for flowers or some mud or something, depending on what sort of animal it is. But you know, they fly past, and I've said to my kids before, just watch it. Just watch that bee, and a bee will come past and it'll have a look at you, you know, no, you're not a flower, and just continue on. You know, and my kids sort of get it. But when they're with other kids and all the other kids scream because there's a bee, they'll tend to react the same way because everybody's doing it. You know, and it's just what they do. And men too, kids, older, adults too, and they'll react like that to all sorts of bugs, all sorts of bugs. I remember being at a event once, and there was a room full of sort of teenagers, and all these dudes started screaming these high-pitched screams, and I went in there, and there was some beetle had got in and was buzzing around, and they're all screaming and jumping off their chairs, and it's teenage boys. I walked in there and sort of got it into a corner and got it between my hands and took it outside and let it go, and they all lost their minds. He touched it, Kirejanai. So you can't laugh at them. It's this culture difference, right? It's this culture difference, no doubt we could go to any country in the world and find weird stuff, couldn't we, And we only say it's weird because by what we're used to, it's weird. Not by what they're used to. That, in actual fact, it's our reaction that's weird. In that situation with the beetle, I was the weird one because I picked up a beetle and took it outside. That's weird by their standards. And not worrying about dust, breathing the dust from the air filter without freaking out is weird. Walking in the rain is weird, or working in the rain. I've worked in the rain before at the old farmhouse. Middle of summer when it's really hot and I'll be outside doing something in the garden, it starts raining and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. And, you'll catch a cold, you're in the rain. They think that's weird. The neighbours probably saw that and thought that was weird. So, it's just what you're used to, isn't it, But it makes for a mildly entertaining video for a couple of people, doesn't it, when they hear this? It's like, what? And for those of you who have allergies or hay fever, you have my total sympathy, because we do have, not immediate family, but extended family members who get allergies and hay fever, and some close friends, and it's horrible. One of our family, extended family members is a firefighter, and he's a really fit, strong, healthy guy, but geez, he gets beaten up by the allergy thing. And the hay fever thing, it really messes him up. It just knocks him about because it's a horrible, horrible thing. Messes up his eyes and his breathing, and just a horrible thing to have. Just bad luck, isn't it? So not being insensitive to that at all. This video is not about that. This video is just about the irrational stuff. The stuff that's just really not logical. The real fear of rain and the fear of dust and the overreaction to it, as with most things in Japan, usually the overreaction to things, which is really dramatic, abenai, it's dangerous, it's like, come on, it's rain. Light rain, Anyway, that's enough of that silliness. More videos coming soon.